Why does nearly every Stark undergo a change in identity throughout the series? Is it just coincidence the Starks can literally change their identity through skin changing? Or could this be telling us something deeper about the history of House Stark? Hi, I'm Eldrick Stoneskin, and if you enjoy theories and analysis of A Song of Ice and Fire, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. One of the main themes in A Song of Ice and Fire is the idea of identity and what it is that makes us who we are, with several characters having secret identities, others undergoing a loss of identity, and some even undergoing complete changes in identity as well, with George R. R. Martin saying the following in regards to the theme itself. Identity is one of the things that I'm playing with in the series as a whole. What is it that makes us who we are? Is it our birth, our blood, our position in the world, or something more integral to us? Our values, our memories, etc. And to really explore this theme of identity and whether it's our physical appearance or who people perceive us to be, or whether it's our spiritual essence, our thoughts and our consciousness who make us who we are, George has introduced a magical ability in the series to be able to separate the body from the mind, known as skin changing, allowing George to explore this theme in a rather unique way, something he appears to be doing in particular with House Stark. A house of skin changers who, as we are about to discuss, nearly all undergo a shedding of their old identity to become someone else, sometimes symbolically and sometimes even literally. With the first example of this being Sansa Stark, who after her escape from King's Landing with the help of Littlefinger, symbolically sheds her old skin before taking on the new identity of Elaine Stone, giving us our first example of a Stark becoming someone else. Our next example is Catelyn Stark, who undergoes a more cruel and literal identity change when she's resurrected by Beric Dondarrion after the Red Wedding, being a compassionate and loving person in life as Catelyn, before taking on a new identity when she's resurrected as a vengeful and hate-filled Lady Stoneheart. Jon Snow even plays into this idea in a rather interesting way as well, having lived this identity change his whole life, being born potentially named Aegon Targaryen before having to take on the new identity of Jon Snow, giving us yet another example of a Stark shedding their old self and becoming someone else. We even find this running theme of Starks changing identities in an honorary Stark as well, with Theon Greyjoy being a ward raised in Winterfell with Ned Stark as a father figure, who goes on to name himself the Prince of Winterfell before being broken by Ramsay to shed his old skin and take on the new identity of Reek. We also see this same change in identity play out several times with Arya Stark as well, taking on a long list of new identities throughout the series such as Arry, Weasel, Nan and Salty, just to name a few. But where this really gets interesting is when Arya reaches Braavos and finds the House of Black and White, a place where she has been asked to undergo a shedding of her old self to become no one before being taught by the Faceless Men how to literally change her identity by wearing the skin of other people, this time associating the Starks with the idea of quite literally becoming someone else by taking their identity using magic. And by no coincidence, this literal and magical identity change also plays out with Bran Stark as well, who after learning to consciously use his skin-changing ability, has been wearing someone else's skin while taking on the identity of Hodor, taking this idea of Stark's changing identity to its very extreme with Bran and Arya, with both these Stark skin changes stealing a person's body or identity by wearing their skin and literally becoming them, leaving me to wonder if the reason George has chosen to explore this idea of identity so heavily through House Stark, while also giving them the magical ability to take the identity of another person, is meant to inform us of the history or the origins of House Stark. Perhaps the abomination of body snatching and the forced changing of identity that we've seen play out with Bran Stark also occurred in the past and could potentially be the original sin of House Stark. Right from the beginning of A Game of Thrones, the main house we're introduced to and led to see as heroic and sympathetic characters are the members of House Stark, with all these characters having excellent moral compasses, standing up for what they believe is right and just in a cruel and unforgiving world, while also facing their own injustices that we wish to see answered. almost as if this family of now broken and separated individuals can do no wrong. However, when we look to their past, it seems that the ancient members of this house of Warg kings may not have been as morally just as their descendants, with Bran even mentioning that a lot of his ancient ancestors had done terrible things. Something which seems to be very much true when we look to the world of Ice and Fire, with the Starks of old wiping out entire ancient houses including the Greenwoods, the Towers, the Ambers and the Frosts, in order for them to maintain control of the lands. We even hear of tales such as the War for Sea Dragon Point, in which the Stark Kings of Winter brought down the Warg King, completely wiping out this line of rival wargs and skin changers by murdering all of his male children and taking his daughters away as prizes. We also hear a similar tale in regards to the assimilation of the Neck, when the Kings of Winter killed the Marsh King and once again stole away his daughter, not only to ensure their unchallenged rule of the North through a campaign of slaughter and brutality, but to also maintain a monopoly on the magical ability of skin changing, likely attempting to impregnate these daughters of rival kings in order to introduce more children born with the gift of skin changing to the line of House Stark. And it seems George might be suggesting to us what these ancient war kings of House Stark might have looked like through the wildling warg Varamir's Six Skins, a cold and brutal man who skin changes multiple animals including wolves and styles himself a sort of warg king beyond the wall, demanding homage from a dozen different villages under the threat of violence from his fearsome skin-changing abilities. A threat that the Warg Kings of Winter likely utilised as well to demand allegiance from their subjects in the North too, paying homage to the ancient Kings of Winter to avoid their ferocious packs of direwolves falling upon them. We also find Varamir using these powers of skin-changing to steal women from surrounding villages in order to assault them in an attempt to create more skin-changing children, once again paralleling the ancient Kings of Winter, who we hear stole the daughters of the Marsh King and the Warg King and likely impregnated them for this same reason. And remarkably, this King of Winter parallel character Varamir's Six Skins has also attempted to steal the skin of someone else using his skin-changing abilities, just as we've seen a current Stark doing, and just as I've suggested, the ancient Stark Kings did as well, with Varamir carrying out what Hagon describes as the blackest sin of them all, slipping his skin while near death to attempt the abomination of body snatching on his wildling companion Thistle, attempting to take her identity using skin changing, just as Bran Stark does to Hodor. Something which ends horrifically for Thistle, who claws her eyes and face and bites off her tongue while the two of them inhabit her body at the same time. Something which sounds remarkably similar to Catelyn Stark during the Red Wedding, clawing her face and becoming silent after her resurrection, associating the Starks with the idea of body snatching yet again. And so if Varamir is meant to symbolise the ancient Warg Kings of Winter, then perhaps this inclusion of the forcible body snatching of another human by George is meant to suggest the ancient Starks having done just this and body snatched other beings in an act of abomination, just as we see occurring with Bran Stark and Hodor. And quite remarkably, when we look to the ancient members of House Stark, we just so happen to find two other Brandon Starks who might have been carrying out this same abomination of body snatching through skin changing, partaking in the blackest sin of them all around the formation of this ancient house. Bran the Builder is a legendary figure who is remembered as having lived during the Age of Heroes and as having been the founding member of House Stark, with this mythological figure having gained his moniker of Bran the Builder due to having been credited as constructing some of the most ancient and amazing structures around Westeros after the devastation of the Long Night. But when we look to the lore that George has presented of this supposed heroic figure, it seems heavily suggested that this Bran Stark was skin-changing giants in order to build his legendary structures. Something I've covered in another of my theory videos, which I'll link at the end screen of this one, with a short summary of the theory going something like this. The first thing to note is that Bran the Builder was likely a skin changer and a warg, being the very first King of Winter, travelling north to gain magic from the Children of the Forest and more than likely wake his skin-changing and potentially green-seeing powers, just as we see our current Bran Stark doing as well. With it being said that the children contributed their magic to the construction of the wall, even though it's also mentioned that the children had no knowledge of building or construction. And while this likely refers to the magical warding of the wall and his other structures, I believe it also refers to their ability to skin change as well. As we hear that the giants were involved in the construction of the wall, even though this ancient race were then cast out beyond its protection, being sent to die and live amongst the others who were only just recently driven back into the lands of always winter. In fact, the song The Last of the Giants even speaks of the construction of the wall being a factor in the demise of their race, dividing their land and cutting them off from their food sources, leaving us with the question as to why the giants would help Bran the Builder build this wall if it divided their lands in two and they ended up discarded on the wrong side of this protective barrier. Unless Bran the Builder was using the magic of the children to forcibly body snatch these giants and use them to build the wall for the realms of men against their will. Which could be why we hear Ygritte claim that the wall was built with blood, possibly referring to Bran the Builder committing a known skin-changing abomination and stealing the lives and bodies of these giants and using their great strength against their will for his own good. We even hear Jon mention to Ygritte that the giants had been involved in the construction of Winterfell as well. However, Jon doesn't say that they helped Bran the Builder. He tells Ygritte that Bran the Builder had used the giants in its construction, once again suggesting Bran the Builder having skin-changed the giants against their will. And to really cement this theory, it was pointed out to me after the release of my video that this is in fact canon in the HBO series, with Ygritte explaining in the lore videos that were released in conjunction with a Game of Thrones that a southern king who is implied as Bran the Builder had enslaved the giants using magic and forced them to build the wall, meaning it's highly likely that the founding member of House Stark was carrying out the blackest sin of them all and body-snatching giants, just as we see occurring with our current Bran Stark, who is also body-snatching a giant in Hodor. But what's quite remarkable is that these two characters aren't the only Brandon Starks in the series who are alluded to by George as having carried out this abomination of body snatching, with one of the most ancient stories we hear about in the North being that of the Night's King, a man who is said to have been the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch and is implied by Old Nan as also being a Brandon Stark. And what's interesting is that just like our current Bran Stark heads north and gains magic, and Bran the Builder headed north and gained magic, it sounds like this Brandon Stark, the Night's King, also headed north and gained a certain magic too. Chasing a woman he glimpsed from atop the wall who sounds like an other, catching her and loving her, and seemingly gaining magic from this interaction, with the legend going on to state that he then used strange sorceries that bound his brothers to his will, suggesting to me that this Brandon Stark, who we remember as the Night's King, could have also been skin-changing his own companions, binding them to his will by wearing their skin and stealing their identity, with the Stark in Winterfell and the King beyond the wall coming together to end the Night's King's rule by freeing the Watch from bondage, suggesting this Brandon Stark as skin-changing other people and taking their identity as well, just as we've seen with the Brandon Stark remembered as Bran the Builder and our current Brandon Stark as well. An abomination we hear is the blackest sin of them all and could potentially have been the inciting factor for somehow causing the long night. And if this is the case, this could be why skin changes are seen as evil south of the wall, why skin changing another person, as we see our current Bran Stark doing, is considered the darkest of abominations, and why the Night's King's name was erased from history. But before we go, there's one more example of body snatching associated with the Starks that I'd like to discuss. An example which hasn't happened yet in the books, but we have seen play out in the HBO series A Game of Thrones, and that would be the body snatching of Bran Stark performed by the Three-Eyed Crow. Something which we could see occur in the Winds of Winter, with Bran having been called north by this mysterious entity to arrive at a Cave of the Children before being fed weirwood paste and being sent back to the ancient past, experiencing some sort of connection through the weirwoods by tasting the blood of a human sacrifice, which could allow this forced takeover of Bran's body to take place. What if the person Bran witnessed being sacrificed in front of the Winterfell heart tree was another Brandon Stark, whose consciousness now resides within the weirwoods through blood magic, a consciousness that we now know as the Three-Eyed Crow, and after Bran travels back through time using the weirwoods, allows this ancient entity to join with his direct descendant and take his body to exist in the current timeline, giving us yet another example of body snatching occurring within House Stark as Bran becomes the three-eyed crow. Leaving me to wonder if this is the reason why we get interesting lines from Old Nan that imply all the Brandons being one in her head. Is this line meant to foreshadow an ancient Brandon Stark snatching the body of our current Brandon Stark using the time-defying capabilities of the weirwoods? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Huge shout out to one of my closest friends and the drummer in my band, who's not only been writing and performing drums in all the music you hear in my videos, but has recently taken up drawing art for the channel too, with this amazing image of Bran's weirwood vision and these incredible depictions of the Night's King and Night's Queen. Keep an eye out for some merch surrounding these pieces of art launching for the channel soon. And as always, if you liked this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button, give the video a like, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the theory below. And make sure to check out my Bran the Builder Skin Changing Giants video with the link on the screen now if you haven't already. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.